Welcome. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning as we are learning. Today, our topic is there space for an extra Torah judicial system? A little bit of a complicated and difficult question to answer, so let's spend a little bit of time unpacking this and trying to understand what's going on here. I'd like to start, first of all, thank Moshe and Liora Berger, who are sponsoring today's shiur in the commemoration of the Yortzeit today of Moshe's mother, Sarah Bas Alexander Yitzchak. Just a little bit of background. Moshe's mother was born in Vienna in 1924, and her family left Vienna to Belgium, and then to Paris, and eventually to the USA. In 1971, they all moved to Israel, where Moshe's mother was always the happiest. She was an ardent Zionist and loved living in Israel. She was the ultimate mother, Bubi, and always had some warm words and lots of warm food. Throughout the good times and the difficult times, she always had a big smile and a hug for everyone. May she have an aliyas neshama. We also want to thank Yitzhak and Barbara Lehman-Siegel, who are sponsoring for the Yortzeit of Barbara's beloved father, Dr. Manfred Lehman, Rav Menashe Rafael ben Hachaver Chaim Vefega, one of the founders of Yilk. He was an international businessman, mostly in Africa and the Caribbean. One of the founders of Yilk. He was actually the second president of our shul. He was born in Stockholm, Sweden. Was fluent in 9 languages, including hieroglyphics, Latin, and Greek. Hebraeus, loved classic music, Mozart, operas, Bialik, and Yehuda Halevi. And was a Talmid Chacham, had received smicha from Ner Yisrael, and had a master's in Egyptology and Oriental Studies from Johns Hopkins University. He was an expert in the Dead Sea Scrolls, a collector of rare Kisvei Yad, and was a published author, staunch public supporter of Israel, and of course the founder of many institutions locally as well. Be'ezrat Hashem, may his neshama have an aliyah, and let us learn. Let us think of these special individuals as we learn today. This is a complicated topic, folks. Last time we spent a little bit of time thinking about does Judaism say that there's one system of government which is recommended, and that's a complicated debate, and it's a Tanakh-based debate. Now we get into, the more complicated, more subtle question, which is, we're only looking at one branch of government. What are there other branches of governments? And if there are, what are they based on? And this starts moving into the modern era today once we get a sense of what's going on beforehand. So if you're to ask your average person, what is, how, upon which law does Jewish society operate? Most people coming out of Jewish day school would say, well, of course, Torah law, right? Everything that the Torah tells us and the way things should operate, and that's going to be the basic fabric of society and the legal system. The problem is that it's not exactly 100% because it's kind of hard to govern a society based only on Torah law, folks. And this is not Rabbi Trump saying this. This is the Gemara saying this. Okay, so this is just to clarify this point. So let me give you a few examples of where it becomes complicated. So let's take a look at the first Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. In the Perek Hayu Boidkim, it's Perek Daf Mem on Aleph. Hayu Boidkin Oisam B'Sheva Chakiros. They would ask the Eidim, they cross-examine the Eidim in court in the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, with 7 different types of questions. Be'ezeh shavua, be'ezeh shana, be'ezeh chodesh, b'kama b'chodesh, be'ezeh yom, be'ezeh shah, be'ezeh makom. So they try to specify time and place. That makes sense. Rabbi Yossi, I mean be'ezeh yom, be'ezeh shah, be'ezeh makom. So Rabbi Yossi was a little more to the point. Okay, good. But now the Gemara, the Mishnah goes a little further and says it gets more complicated. It says, Kol amar b'bedikos zarezeh meshubach, ma'aser bodak ben zakah be'uktzei ta'enim. I skipped a line. That was the most important line. It was the bottom line on the page. Makirin atem oisoi hitartem oisoi ha'ovid azara es mi avar ba'mei avad. So they would ask the specifics of the crime committed, and then they would ask the witnesses who are testifying. They're in the dock right now. Did you give them hasra? Let's just clarify what hasra is for a second. Hasra is a system of warning. This is absent from the legal system that we'll call the American Code of Law. So hasra is where the witnesses would be responsible to say, don't commit crime X, or you will be subject to the punishment for crime X. And that's then you get a hasra. But it gets more complicated than that, as the Gemara tells us that the hasra, the warning process, has to be within toich kadei dibur. It has to be within the amount of time, which is 3 seconds, that a person can say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe, that within that span of time, which is essentially at maximum 3 seconds, the hasra needs to be given within those 3 seconds of the crime committed, and the person needs to say af al pichein, meaning to say to heck with that, and then commits the crime. Right? So the what we're trying to ascertain that this person is really rebelling against Torah law. And in order to do that, there can be no distractions. The person needs to be fully cognizant of what they're doing in order to get there. But now, folks, if you ran a good mafia, right? So you would just make sure the rules of operation would be is that when you're about to kill anybody, all you need to do is wait 5 seconds, and now you're done, right? Right? So if, in the unlikely chance you've not eliminated the witnesses, right, then and there's people around you warning you, well, first of all, if they're brothers, then you're all right, because then the apostle aid us. But let's say they're not brothers and they warn you. All you need to do is wait 5 seconds, eliminate the victim, and then eliminate them, and you're all right, right? Because in the end of the day, nothing else is going to bring you to trial. In fact, the Mishnah tells us in Makos, the last Mishnah in Makos in source 2, Sanhedrin noheges be'eretz of chutz la'aretz. The Sanhedrin had power of jurisdiction both in Israel and diaspora. The Sanhedrin ha'oreges echad b'shavua nikre chovlanis. A Sanhedrin which would kill once in a shavua is called a distractive Sanhedrin.
70 years. 70.
So I was going to ask you, shavua sounds like a week, right? But it's not a week. It refers to 7 years, at least in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah omer echad shivim shana. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah disagrees with Tanna Kama, and he says once in 70 years is considered chovlanis, is considered a distractive Sanhedrin. Rabbi Tav and Rabbi Kiva omer ilu hayin b'Sanhedrin lo nerag adam me'olam. So Rabbi Tav and Rabbi Akiva, later colleagues, said that if we were in power, we would have ensured there would be no deaths, there would be no executions in Sanhedrin. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel omer af Rabbi Shimon Gamliel omer. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, yeah, that's very nice for the murderers. It's not very nice for society, because society is going to then in the absence of power. What happens? Anarchy sets in, and that's what you're going to see. The Gemara goes into detail. The Gemara says, well, how does this work? Like, what would Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tavron precisely do? So the Gemara goes on into great detail, to graphic detail, to say how they would ask questions which would be very hard for Adam to produce the necessary details about. Did you know if this person was a treifa, was a person who was about to die? Maybe there was a hole where you inserted the dagger that you didn't know about, all those kind of questions. And when it comes to adultery, do you know specific graphic details that would relate to the fact that you actually saw the couple in such a position? All these kind of things which are really basically impossible for your standard bystanders to produce. And therefore they would have really essentially, they would have acquitted most people coming to court. And so you say to yourself, the question of Rabbi Shimon and Gamliel rings true. So if that's the case, Imkein Marbe Shofchei Damim B'Yisrael. There are bad people out there, and they will take advantage of anything they can in the law. And if the law is not providing a safety net for society, then hey, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have a society of Shofchei Damim. How do we answer Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's question is at stake. Similarly, you see this a remarkable observation. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah Daf Chesam and Beis, it says a number of places in Shas. The Gemara says that towards the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, when things were getting a little hot, when things were not good among the Jews, the Gemara says in source 4, "My time came to Chazud and Ifishu lehu roitzkin v'lo yachilu l'meidan." Amru mutav nigle lemakom lemakom kiechi dalai lechayvo. So the Beis Din says, the Sanhedrin Agadol said before, this is 40 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, it's around the year 30, Common Era, they said, look, there's so much murder going on in society, it is better for us, the Sanhedrin, to move from our station in the Lishka Agazis in order to lose our ability to be able to execute. So the Gemara talks about what's called Mokom Gorim, that the place they were allowed to execute based on where they sat. They said, we're going to remove ourselves from where we sit in order not to be able to judge people. Which seems counterintuitive, because what you would say is, if there's a lot of murder, then what you need, Mayor Giuliani, is zero tolerance. Right? That's what you need to start doing. We're going to start ticketing on those people double parking in the old city. That's what they should have said. Right? But in the end of the day, what did they do? They said, no, we're going to stop judging in order to not to prosecute murderers. So you see that's not going to work for society, right? That it sounds like Sanhedrin's got a different agenda than simply keeping society in check, and you wonder then, how did society operate? How exactly, if Torah was the only system that was operational at that time, then that doesn't make sense, right? Any circumstantial evidence would be disqualified, right? Smoking gun would not be sufficient. You couldn't even incarcerate somebody based on that. So how do we do this? So there's a very, very famous observation made by Rabbeinu Nissim of Gerona. He wrote a number of works, but one of them was a very important work called the Drosha Saran. This question bothered me for many, many, many years. This is a question I never really understood. And it's sort of in the back of my mind, because you don't like to ask questions which you don't think there are answers to, right? But this is a question which I'm sure bothers many people. And I happened to have the opportunity, I was going through the Drosha Saran when I was in yeshiva, and I went through Drosha Yud Aleph, which is a drosha on Parshas Shoftim. And by the way, folks, when they talk about a drosha, we're talking about a drosha. We're not talking about 9 minutes and Rabbi, why are we coming out of shul 3 minutes later than usual? And there's a kiddush that was waiting for us. We're talking about a real drosha, right? So read it. It's very long. Okay, so it's pages after pages after pages. And in this, he describes the general. He has an arc where he looks at Parshas Shoftim as a whole, which is what we're going to try to do. And he makes the following observation. So gesund. He makes the following beautiful observation. I think it's an incredible insight into Judaism. Source 5. So here's what he says. He's be'enai shata chasuv kachu. I'm going to explain to you what I think the Torah is talking about in Parshas Shoftim. Yodohu ki amin ha'enoshi tzarich l'shofet she'yishpot bein pratav. Every society, all human beings, need to have some sort of system of justice. Shim lo kain ish Israel chaim bela'on. Look at Venezuela. Otherwise, when there's no system of government, when you have a failed state, then anarchy rules supreme. Olam nishchas. The world will be destroyed. There is no way for people to succeed, to prosper, for families to be built, because you don't have a government protecting them. V'kol umma tzricha lazeh yishuv medini. Every society needs safety of government. Ad she'amar hachacham shekatalistim hiskimu b'neihem hayosher. Even bandits need to have a social contract. There needs to be a basic understanding of how this operates. When you read free economics and you read how the drug dealers operate, right? They did research on those journalists who went into the east side of Chicago, the south side of Chicago, and joined a drug dealing gang. There are rules. There's how stipends work for those who die in service. There's all kinds of things. There's a social contract of how these things work in terrorist organizations. Right? The reason read the Harpoon by Nitzana Leitman Darshan if you want to have an eye opener. It's all money. There's a social contract of how terrorist organizations operate. It says Yisrael tzrichim lazeh kiyeser umos. And guess what? Israel needs that the same. Israel also needs a basic social contract of government. But in addition to basic social contract of how society has to operate, Israel is special. We also have Torah. And the Torah gives us fundamental, objective, God-given standards, which we need to implement as well. Because we have to keep within the bounds of Torah as well as basic social contract. So, as an example, a person violates Shabbos. Is society going to fall apart? Is there going to be anarchy next Saturday? The answer is, not necessarily. Society will carry on running. But this person has transgressed one of the most severe requirements and regulations and commandments in the Torah. It's the fourth of the Aseres HaDibros. That's warrants the death penalty if done b'mezid with Asra. That needs to be taken to justice. Therefore, these two items are needed. The person needs to be judged based on true justice, which is based on the Torah. Let's say that you cannot prosecute a person based on true justice. In other words, you don't know that they rebelled against God's Torah. You don't know that this person really rejected the Torah. He missed Asra. They weren't Adam, but you still need to get rid of them. right? Still a threat to society. And therefore God instituted two different governing forces in order to address these two needs. So there are shoftim, those are judges. That's the courts, the Sanhedrin. They are going to be the institution to apply God's given law. And their jurisdiction does not extend beyond that. So the person, they don't know that this person transgressed Torah law. There is no way they're going to prosecute such a person. And then you have the king. You have a different branch of government, and he takes care of the rest. So as an example, let's say we deal with the case that we talked about beforehand. So a person comes to court, murder's been committed, they come in, and they cross-examine the witnesses. The witnesses do check out, they're not related to each other, and so on. Okay, good. Then they say, well, technically, did you give us straw? And the one says, yeah, absolutely. The other one says, I forgot. I forgot to give us straw. Or they find out that the fellow waited 5 seconds, right? Or they figured out that they only saw a smoking gun, right? One person enters the house being chased by another person with a gun. There's 7 shots. The person walks out the house with a smoking gun. The person's dead. No one else is in the house. The person said, did you see that? No, we didn't see it. Okay, case dismissed. So they walk out into the federal police, and the federal police then take them to the king's court, and that person is executed the next day. That's how it works. Which means, how is society going to have basic law and order? That's the king's department. How is it going to be that a society operates based on the Torah, absolute law of the Torah? That's the shoftim as well. So there are 2 different departments working at the same time in order to preserve, on the one hand, basic society justice, on the other hand, the Torah law as well. So we have built into us, Ashreinu Matoch Chalkeinu, not just the fact that we need to keep society running, but that we're also upholding God's holy Torah, which sometimes has social ramifications and sometimes has ritual ramifications as well. As an example, Shabbos, which is not a social law, it's a ritual law, as an example. So that's the way he looks at it, which is a remarkable idea. Think about this for a moment. Is we have 2 arms of government. How does the Ran arrive at this? The Ran arrives at that per force, in a certain sense. This is a very beautiful way of understanding how society works. And that's why a king is given more power than the regular court systems. His court systems are going to have a wider net, which is why, says the Ran, that the Torah spends so much time regulating the power of the king. When the Torah describes making a king, he has to have a Sefer Torah, right? He has to abide by the Torah. He can't have too much. He can't be too indulgent in life, because there's many laws which ride upon his shoulders. One can see the dangers and the weaknesses in such a society. But if that's the case, when the king is killing a person based on circumstantial evidence, is he doing that because the Torah told him to? Meaning, did the Torah say in the smoking gun episode, the circumstantial evidence, did the Torah say when there's a smoking gun that you can kill somebody? The answer is no. That's social contract, which even bandits have. But we are lucky that we have another tiered system above that. But that means that the Torah recognizes that you need to have another system of government. That being the case, it gives us a lot more to think about when the Torah says that the request of Bnei Israel in the future will be, when that Bnei Israel come and say, you're going to ask for a king, l'shavteinu? No, not l'shavteinu. Kechol hagoyim. What does it mean like all the nations? The answer is, every nation needs a system of government. And that's what they're asking for. They're not asking for it, which now gives a lot more meat to what the Ran said, what we learned last week, which is when they ask the king to be the shafet, that's when it's dangerous. Because when they say we're going to want to pool all power, Torah power and judicial power of executive power into one system of government, that's a problem. Yes, that's what the Ran was really saying last week with a little more depth now. Leah, yes.
Doesn't the king then obliterate the power of the Torah court?
Oh, so you're saying, doesn't it eclipse, essentially, the Torah court? So it sounds like the first stop would be the Torah court, meaning the Sanhedrin would be the main system of government, because in a certain sense you could ask the basic question yourself, which is, what right do we have as one human being to kill another human being? I mean, that's a very, very heavy thing for a human being, not in a state of battle, not in a state of immediate life threat, to kill another human being. So the one answer is when the Torah tells us that this is when you can execute somebody, based on these laws, check 1, check 2, check 3, check 4, then we can say that the Torah says that person dies. But that's not because we said so. How can you, as a human being, say another person deserves to die? Right? That's the only answer that we have. So that person will go to a Sanhedrin and they say, did this person transgress the Torah? Were they aid him like the Torah said so? All those things are Torah law. Now let's say that fails, right? Let's say that fails. So now the second recourse is, well, having this fellow in society is going to be a real problem. So the king's going to say, listen, based on the law of the common law of the land, the circumstantial evidence is sufficient enough to get rid of this person. But that would be the second tier. That would be, so to speak, a supplementary net, right? So more than a regular society.
I don't think that the king could kill somebody for not being Shomer Shabbos.
Yeah,
that's not a societal. That's not going to hurt.
Yeah. Now, just to clarify, one piece which is also worthwhile knowing is that the courts also have an extrajudicial power as well. So the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that at a time where morality was a little bit shaky in society and people were engaging in licentious behavior in public, the courts themselves would give lashes to such people because that was seen as leading to the wrong. That's without the necessary due process, right? So that works, but that's in the ritual realm. If you think about it, the king is in the social realm of this. Well, so there is this extended sort of program over here. But it's worthwhile noting, I think, Leo, in answering your question, is that the first stop is the Sanhedrin. The king would be to ensure that nothing's falling through the cracks because it could.
But the Sanhedrin would also, with extrajudicial ways, there would be sort of putting the coup and all that.
Correct. So there would, but you're right. There were times with the courts, and so the Ran addresses that, and he argues that it's only within called aspects which are concerned specifically about Torah law, infringements of Torah law in general, rather than the social law as well. So he has two sets of extrajudicial law, essentially. Sorry, yeah.
But we're really talking about not in the abstract. We're talking about religious law, where we have people going to Beis Din, and I thought the backup to, first of all, using Adam was really to say, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, that you have to love a person enough to want him to do better and to not sin, which is why there's a system of Asra'ah. But absent that's part two, I didn't think was necessarily the living king, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, if we as humans failed to not stop a crime from happening, and he fell through the system because he waited 5 seconds, or it was a smoking gun, that's okay, God would take care of him anyway.
So in terms of Adam, Eidos itself, the reason why Shnei Adam, and all the very severe limitations as to what Adam look like. It's a very limited scope of who can act as an aid. The reason why that we do that is ultimately we could theorize reasons, but it's because the Torah said Al Pi Shnei Adam Yakum Davar, meaning truth is established through the process of two Adam, and we don't really know why. But the reason why we can rely on it is because it's a gzeira, HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed us, which is helpful to us, because otherwise, what level, what bar of, we'll call it knowledge, do you need to have to execute another person or give another person lashes? I would be very concerned if I was the one who had to arbitrate that and say, this amount of evidence. The Torah tells us, and that's a gzeira himil fona. You could add the theory of but I'm actually happier to say that it's a gzeira, because then it's only a God-given truth that I'm operating with. In terms of the second thing, you're right, and I would love to think like you. Unfortunately, the criminals don't. And what happens is that it may be true that ultimately, at some point in time, on their yacht, 30 years from now, which they bought with stolen money, based on the backs of all the people that they extorted and killed, maybe they'll fall off the staircase and God will take his justice. But in the meantime, there's been 30 years worth of more victims, and so. What the king is ensuring is that there's not going to be 30 years, and we can't leave everything in society. And that's what I would have thought. But what he's saying is there has to be another system which puts such people behind bars, because otherwise it's going to look at society. Look what happens in society. Let me just get a little further. I want to take
standards that we don't know the standards of the king. If
we don't. And that's precisely what I'm saying. Is there space for an extrajudicial system in Torah? And the answer is yes. Where did he get that from? For all intents and purposes, he could have copied that from the British parliamentary law, which is what the state of Israel did. Okay? So that doesn't really matter, because the point is, whatever the systems of justice of surrounding societies are, if that's going to work, let it work. That's great. Meaning, let there be some system of justice. Let's take it one step further. Now, so it turns out that I think it's even more sophisticated and exquisite than even what we were thinking. And the Torah is a very sophisticated system. We just don't talk in these terms because we're so used to living outside of sovereign Jewish rule that we when we read these things, we're just reading parasha. We're not understanding that Torah is talking about how to govern a society because we're still in the diaspora mentality. Okay, so just to take a step backwards, in the year 1748, there was a French philosopher whose name was, and again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing him, Charles Louis de Secondat, Baron de la Brade Montesquieu. Okay. Anyways, when I grew up, there was a road that was just parallel to us called Montesquieu, and I didn't realize it was named after him. Okay, so he was a very fascinating philosopher who wrote a book called The Spirit of the Laws, L'Esprit de Lois, and in it he makes the following observation. Now, folks, why is 1748 relevant? Just why is this an important year? Or just in terms of generally speaking? At this point in time, it's pre-French Revolution, right? So in charge of France is a monarch at this point in time. And so remember, what year was the French Revolution? 1789, good. And so this is also in regards to America. At this point in time, this is also pre-revolution. Okay, so just to appreciate the brilliance of his observation, he says the following. He says, liberty does not flourish because men have natural rights or because they revolt if their rulers push them too far. Those are two extremes, and he's talking about both those things that were about to just happen. It flourishes because power is so distributed and so organized that whoever is tempted to abuse it finds legal restraints in his way. So you distribute the power in such a way that it's not seated in one person. And he goes on to describe it. In every government there are three sorts of power: legislative, the executive in respect to things dependent on the law of the nation, of nations, and the executive in regard to matters that depend on civil law. By the virtue of the first, the prince or magistrate enacts temporary or perpetual laws and amends or abrogates those that have already been enacted. By the second, he makes peace or war, sends or receives embassies, establishes the public security, and provides against or invasions. By the third, he punishes criminals or determines the disputes that arise between individuals. The latter we'll call judiciary power, and the other simply the executive power of the state. When the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person, or in the same body of magistrates, there can be no liberty, because apprehensions may arise lest the same monarch or senate should enact tyrannical laws to execute them in a tyrannical manner. Does that make sense? You can't have the same person doing the law and making the law. Well, otherwise, it's bad. Similarly, he says, again, if there's no liberty, if the judiciary power be separated from the legislative and executive. Right? So he points out you need to separate each of these three arms of government in order for there to be a just and a civil society. The reason why this, of course, is so important is because, guess what? When the American Revolution came along, how did they set up, how did the framers of this country set up the branches of government in response to British monarchy? Was precisely as such. And they set up three branches of government, the legislative, executive, and judicial, each meant to be a check and balance for the other, in order to make sure that those who are making the law are not executing the law, right? And this is precisely how the United States of America runs, which is, if you think about it, is a remarkable stride for humankind to arrive at this system of government, where you have a level of systems of government. Now, notice the British system is also with a democratic monarchy to what you call parliamentary monarchy. Is a constitutional monarchy, thank you, is really like a camel, right? So a camel is like, a horse created by a committee, right? So it's like, what happened was there used to be a king, and then the people got more and more upset, so they kept on adding extra things. We'll have a House of Lords, and then we'll have a House of Commons, and they kept on adding as concessions to people, and you end up with this hodgepodge of, different systems, which is fine, but America started from the beginning and said, well, no, let's set this up lechatchila. And based on Montesquieu's ideas, they separated the powers of government into three arms. Phenomenal. Okay? Now, argues Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Rabbi Sachs has many essays on this topic, and it's so remarkable. He says, Judaism was already doing that. Judaism already had got this long before Montesquieu came along. So he gives an example. If you take a look at the pasuk in Yeshayahu, when we describe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say Hashem Shofteinu, Hashem is our judge, Hashem Echokakenu, Hashem is our lawgiver, Hashem Malkeinu, Hashem is our king, Hu Yoshienu, and as such He'll save us. When we describe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we already talk about three distinct operations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or hats HaKadosh Baruch Hu wears when it comes to government: a shofet, a mechokek, and a melech. So, thank you, Mr. Montesquieu. But it turns out that Judaism already was talking about this, and in fact, argues Torah Sachs, if you look at Parshas Shoftim, you will see three distinct arms of government, which perhaps we don't think about in these terms. The first, of course, is a king, which we've been spending a good amount of time on, when the Torah says, you want a king, have a king, and here's how you do it. We discussed last week as to, is this prescription, is this really a prophecy? The next is the prophet. The Torah tells us in the next source, they're listening to all kinds of sorcerers and quacks. That's not how Hashem wants you to live. I'm going to set up a prophet for you, and you're going to listen to that person. At Sinai, you said this is too much fire, too much lightning. Let me hear from a prophet. So this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, therefore I'm going to give you a prophet, because that's what you asked for. And then finally, the priest. The Torah tells us also Parshas Shoftim, lo yiyeh halakohanim alevim kol shevet Levi chelek v'nachlo im Yisrael Hashem hu nachloso Ishay Hashem v'nachloso yochelu. They don't have their own portion. They're not landed. I'm skipping a pasuk. V'zeh yiyeh mishpat hakohanim me'es ha'am me'es zochei hazevach im shor im sev v'nasan hakohen azroa v'alechayim v'akeba. And then these are the things you're going to give to them for them to be supported. So three, in a certain sense, the way that Rabbi Sachs looks at this is there's three systems of governance in Judaism. One is the priest, the prophet, and the king. That's the way he looks at the system. And each of them performs a different function. And there can be tensions between each of these different branches. In an essay he wrote called Three Crowns, he points out, this is the next source, the second line, he says, the king led the people in a battle. He recruited an army, levied taxes, and was responsible for civic order. That was what the Moran pointed out. The priest mediated the relationship between the people and God. He served in the temple, offered sacrifices, and ensured that the holy was at the heart of the national life. The prophet brought the word of God to the people and the cause of the people to God. And that's why the Mishnah tells us there's Shlosh Ksarim Hem. There's three crowns. Keser Kuna, Keser Malchus, and Keser Torah, as represented by the Navi. Right? So these are not just meant to be the crowns that are around the different Klei Shares, whether it's the Aron, the Shulchan, or the Mizbeach HaZahav, but it also reflects in society three different crowns of leadership necessary. And you can think back to Tanakh where there are tensions between them. So as an example, let me give you just like an example, and it makes so much sense now. There's so much time where there is a tension between the prophet and the king, where the king seems to be going rogue, and the prophet's trying to rein the king in, right? Because the prophet, representing Torah, is meant to be trying to be a check and balance to the actions of an absolute, or otherwise would be absolute ruler. Sometimes the Kohen plays that role. As an example, when it talks about the young king Yoash, whose entire family was massacred by his mother, and she Atalyahu killed the entire family. She was from the other side. She was from a daughter of Israel. When her husband was killed by Yehu, she massacred the rest of her family to gain absolute power. Yoash was saved and placed above the Kodesh Kodashim by Yoasheva, which was the wife of Yehoiada. Yehoiada was the Kohen Gadol at the time. Saved him, put him on the throne at the age of 7, and guided him. But guess what happened when Yehoiada died? When Yehoiada died, people said, Yoash, you grew up above the Kodesh Kodashim. You must be holy. And, human beings have a very difficult time with ego in general. And when people start worshipping you, as we see in today's society, it's very hard to turn that down. And he allowed them to worship him to a certain degree. He allowed that type of flattery to work. And when the son of Yehoiada, who was the Kohen at the time, called Zechariah HaKohen, came to him on Yom Kippur and said, folks, this is not the society God wants. They killed him in the Beis HaMikdash. And Zachariah's tomb is in the bottom of the valley of Kidron today. You can visit Zachariah Cohen's. It's next to Yad Avshalom. It's the two huge mausoleums. So he's the one. Here's the one on the right is Yad Zachariah, and because he was killed, the Gemara tells us this terrifying story that the blood of Zachariah was never acquitted, and it boiled until the point of Vespasian came in and killed many people on that spot because he realized there was some blood that had not been given. Its full revenge. I mean, really bad stuff. And that again is a dispute between two branches of government, really. There's the Kohen and the king. And there's many times it'll be the Kohen and the prophet. If you think about Eliyahu and Achav and that relationship. What's happening over here is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying is how do I govern, how do I rein in different parts? The teaching of God, the ideas of God in action in the Beis HaMikdash, or civic law which is being dispensed by the king. The question really is and this is I guess the piece that's left out is, where does the shofet belong? Where does the judge belong in all of this? Because the beginning of the parasha is shoftim, the shotrim, titeh lecha b'chol shorecha. Let me ask you a question. In American society, under which branch of government does the police force belong? Under which branch, right? Executive. Good. The police force belongs under the executive because that's execution of law. But that's only federal police. It's more complicated in America because you have state as well. Which, by the way, is in a certain sense modeled after Israel when it would operate correctly, which is Shvatim and Melech. Okay, so there was meant to be that division of we'll call subdivision of identity as well. The Torah recognizes that. But that's the way it works in America. So where does the shofet belong in the Torah law? So one option is you could say that really he is an expression of the priest, right? You could say the priests were the ones who organized the so to speak the shoftim and the shotrim. How so? Because if you read in Parashas Shoftim when it says Ki polei mimcha davar lamishpat. Ben din nadin, ben dam nadan, ben din nadin, ben negel negel revised visharecha. The pasuk says, "Where do you go? Vas ala kohanim alevim ela shofet sheyeh b'mamahem." So you go to the kohanim and put it there together is the shofet. So maybe the shoftim are an expression of the branch of government, or the branch of leadership, which is the kohanim. Another possibility is no, maybe it's really an expression of the priest. I mean, the priest is teaching Torah law. He represents Torah law, so maybe he could actually belong under that. And therefore, coming back to the Ram, Rabbeinu Nissim, maybe that's where it really belongs. So that's the priest, the prophet, as the prophet, as the Navi. And how do you see this? Because at the end of Seder Olam Rabbah, which is the Medrash timeline of of Jewish history, it describes that at the time that the Nevi'im were retired, at the beginning of the Bayis Sheni, who took the place of the Nevi'im? The Medrash tells us, when Alexander the Macedonian arose, Alexander the Great arose. It says Hu Alexandros Macedon Shemalach Yud Beis Shana Ad Kan HaYunevim Misnavim B'Ruach HaKodesh Mekan Va'elach Hat Oznecho Shma Divrei Chachamim. So who took the place of the Navi? Is the sage. So maybe the sage is an expression of the Navi, but perhaps, and I think that most tenably is that maybe in and of itself, maybe it's the fourth arm of government, which the Torah is talking about, and that's perhaps, I think what Rabbi Sachs is saying in the quotation in this essay, he says, for the Torah, as John Locke put it, were there to be no law, there which is no freedom. Indeed, the Judaic system might be best described as a normocracy. In the famous saying, it represents the government of laws, not of men. So in a certain sense, maybe the shoftim themselves are another branch of government. So that's the shofet and the melech, with two systems of courts, in a sense. And then you have the teachers and expressors of Torah as the kohanim and the leviim, to the kohanim and the prophets, to keep in check the other balance, the other parts of power, whether it be the king or the shofet themselves. If looking at it from that perspective, then you essentially have four different branches of government. Two, in a certain sense, executive or judicial, and then you have the Navi and the Kohen. Worthwhile thinking about how these all interact with each other, because all four of them are discussed in Parshas Shoftim. That Parsha describes all the systems necessary for a government to operate as well. And you see, I'd like to talk about one example of a breakdown of these systems, where Judaism once again regains power, but has a problem when it regains power as well. So the Torah tells us in the end of Parashas Vayechi, Lo Yasur Shevet Yehuda, the scepter should not leave Yehuda. And again, we're going to run into interpretation concerns over here, depending on who's reading this. So Rov of the Mefarshim would say this refers to the scepter, referring to monarchy. The Abarbanel may equivocate over here and say, well, that's if you have a king, if you chose that system of government. But be it as it may, the Torah tells us that Yehuda is specifically assigned to have the ruler, be the ruling class, or produce a ruler, at least. So the Ramban, famously, the Ramban does not comment on Nach. He did, but we don't have his writings except on Eov and Shir HaShirim. But he does comment on Nach through his commentary on the Torah, and he says that maybe this is the problem that was encountered by the Chashmonaim, because ultimately the Chashmonaim took rulership, and guess where they were from? They were from the tribe of Levi. They came from the tribe of Levi, and they did not return the monarchy once they fought back as the religious zealots to fight against the Greeks' law. They maintained the monarchy and did not give it back. And says the Ramban at the end over here, and just let's see what source. It's working on different. 18. Thank you. At the very end, the last two lines. He says, "Esher gam ken shaya aleihem chet b'malchusam mipnei shayu kohanim." They were priests. ונצטוו ותשמרו את כנעשכם לכל דבר מזבח ולמבייס הפורח זרעתם עבודת מתנה אתן כנעשכם ולא היה להם למלוך רק לעבודת עבודת השם. It wasn't their job to, so to speak, overstep their bounds. Their role of leadership in society was to serve in the base of Mikdash, and it was not to step onto the throne as well. So just to appreciate an expression of where this went awry is to look into what happened with the Chashmonaim themselves. So here's the Hasmonean dynasty family tree. So you have Matisiel, who is of course the patriarch of the family. He's the one who kills that Greek or Hellenized representative in that village, who wants to sacrifice a pig to one of the deities of the Greeks. He has 5 sons, famously Yehuda. Then you have Yonatan, Eliezer, Shimon, and Yochanan. Yochanan is John. Okay, and then Shimon, when after Yehuda passes away, I think there's 3 of the sons rule. Okay, 3 of the sons take rule, and then afterwards Shimon's children take rule, and the most famous of whom being a person called John Hyrcanus, who was called Yochanan Kohen Gadol. That's what the Gemara calls him. He was called in Greek. He was called John Hyrcanus the first, and he was a very powerful monarch at the time in Israel. He lived in the year 135 to 105, or ruled before Common Era. That's when he had a long-lasting reign, and he expanded the territory of Judea, of the sovereignty of Israel at that time, extensively, both to the east, the north, and the south. And in fact, for those people who go to visit this area, this excavation in Israel today called Beit Guvrin, if you want to do the eschatological, those were not Jewish homes that you are uncovering. Those were Idumean houses, and the reason why they were destroyed, there's a debate among the archaeologists as to why they were destroyed, whether it was the Jews who were trying to do a forced conversion upon them, and they destroyed their houses when they did not acquiesce and moved south, or they themselves destroyed their own houses to avoid being converted to Judaism. One of the only times in history that Jews forced Judaism upon any other nation. And he was criticized by this, by the Chachamim. This is not seen as a positive thing. But when you do those excavations, that was as a function of John Hyrcanus. In fact, all the coins, the latest coins they found minted, go to the year, I believe it's 139 or whenever it was in his rule, that before Common Era, which is, that's when when you can't find any coins later than that, you know that's the year that it must have happened, or close to that year. So it all matches up to the rule of John Hyrcanus. And we know that he was a complicated person. The Gemara says, based on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, what does Yochanan Kohen Gadol say in Pirkei Avos? What is his one statement that he says? Al tamin ba'atzmucha ad yom moscha, don't believe in yourself until the day of your death. Why, says the Gemara in source 20 in Brachos, v'loi v'hatanan al tamin ba'atzmucha miyom ad moscha, shareyo Yochanan Kohen Gadol shimesh b'kuna gedola shmonim shana ulevasoif naset tzedaki. Yochanan Kohen Gadol was a high priest, and at the end of his life, 80 years in, he became a Sadducee as well. Now, when you read this Gemara without context, you say, oh, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he was a high priest, fantastic. What you don't realize is he's the grandson. He's the grandson of Matisiel. And it's not so much that he's the high priest that's the problem. The problem is that he is also the king. Right, that's the complexity of it here. And it leads us to the foreign Gemara. The Goren Kiddushin says, Vom Rabbaye, Mina Aminallah, Detanya Maisa, B'yanai HaMelech, Sholach Lekulchis, Sheva Midbar, V'kivei Sham Shishim Krachim. So we know that Yana HaMelech. Now, Yana is a term which refers to what the Gemara terms as generally bad kings, bad Jewish kings. And so this refers in this case to Yochanan Kohen Gadol. He went to Kulchis in the desert after conquering 60 towns. And by the way, if you go down to Idumea and to Beit Guvrin, that's the area that he's just conquered. Okay, so you can visit this area. He was so happy afterwards. He was so happy about his conquest of expanding Israel. He said, we're going to eat in the same way that when they were building the Beis Hamikdash, they ate. So he sets up his tables lavishly and so on. There's a really bad fellow at the table, and his name was Elazar ben Pu'era. And he says, Shmoy Vayomer Elazar ben Pu'era Yana HaMelech Libam Shel Prushim Alecha. Says the Pharisees, knows the rabbis of the time, are plotting against you. So he says, what should I do to test the waters? So he says, so he says, why don't you put your tzitz on? What's the tzitz again? That's the forehead plate. That was one of the 8 big day kohana worn by the Kohen Gadol. Why did he have it? Because he was the Kohen Gadol. He says, put it on. So he put it on. You would have been Gedidya Shmoy. So there was an elder whose name was Yehuda ben Gedidya. And he says, Vayami Yehuda ben Gedidya leYanai Melech Rav lecha Keser Malchus. You have the crown already. Hanach Keser Kuhuna. Take off the tzitz. Okay, so this is precisely what we're talking about over here. He has overstepped the space that he is supposed to exist in. He's supposed to be the Kohen, but he's not supposed to wear the other crown. He's wearing 2 kesarim right now. Zara shel Aaron. So and there was a rumor about Yana's mother was captive in Modi'im, and maybe his lineage was tainted, and they found out that it was just a rumor. These kind of things happen whenever there's too much power, and lineage is questioned. But Yomer Elazar ben Po'era Yana HaMelech Hedyot Shebi Yisrael Kachu Dinoi V'ato Melech V'Kohen Gadol Kachu Dinoch. They're going to say this about you. You're a king and a priest. They're going to allow this to just slide. He says, so he says, what should I do? By the way, notice that he's not very active over here. He's very passive. He says, trample them, crush them now. What about the Torah? What about the wisdom that they represent? Now, meaning to say the third arm, the third crown, which is Nevuah or Chachma. He says, they said, Torah, it's alright, you can always learn it. What's he referring to? The Torah? Shebechsav is Munach B'Keren Zavis. You can always, but not the Torah Shabbat Peh, because that's through the Chachamim. So this fellow, Elazar ben Po'era, was ignoring the vibrant Torah expressed to the lives of people. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Miyad Nizraka B'Boy Minos, Tahavolei L'Meimar, Tinach Torah Shebechsav Shabbat Peh, he should have said, what about the Torah living through these people themselves? He killed the sages because he felt that they were overstepping their boundary. And ultimately the Torah was shamem until the next set of zugos came around, Shimon ben Shetach, that you read about as well. Where does this all come down to? What's the struggle over here? The struggle is when one person takes 2 roles of leadership, takes 2 crowns, and ignores the third, which is trying to pull him back to check. Because for society to operate, for Jewish society to operate, you need to have distinct leaders who are doing distinct jobs. And when you put too many of them into one place, into one silo, then society will fail, as it did as well. And Josephus talks about this as well in his relationship to the Pharisees and why it was that he became a Sadducee as well. One of many examples when power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, as Shakespeare says, and it's important to appreciate this and the struggle that the Torah is trying to encourage us when trying to govern a society. How do you understand? Where does Torah law live? Where does civic law live? Where's the Torah expressed? Where's the Torah taught? And how that harnesses those who are executing law in society as a whole. Which now leads us, as we have the opportunity now finishing this share. Next week we're going to talk about the topic will be called synagogue and state, trying to understand modern Israel today, because all this comes to bear when the framers of Israel's society came about in the last 75 years, trying to arrive at some balance between all these important values. Thank you so much for taking the time. I hope it is a wonderful and meaningful week ahead.